Let me take you back, not just decades, but centuries, back to the edge of the known world. The year is 1607. The sea is endless. Gray skies stretch over a wind-tossed Atlantic, and out of the mist a battered ship appears, her sails torn, her passengers weary. They are English settlers, hopeful, desperate, and afraid. They've come seeking land, wealth, maybe even freedom. They drop anchor in a place they will name Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English colony in North America. It is the beginning. North America is not empty. It never was. For thousands of years, native nations have lived on this land. The Powhatan, Iroquois, Cherokee, and hundreds more. They have their own languages, laws, and legends. The newcomers arrive not to discover a continent, but to disrupt a world already thriving. Relations between settlers and native tribes swing like a pendulum, from trade and cautious peace to violence and betrayal. Disease brought by Europeans ravages native populations. But the settlers are not safe either. Famine, cold, and conflict claim most of their number. Jamestown nearly collapses in its first year. Only a few survive. England watches closely. Across the Atlantic, the British Empire grows restless. Spain has its silver from South America. France is carving its path through Canada and the Mississippi Valley. England is late to the race for empire, but determined to catch up. Throughout the 1600s and early 1700s, more colonies are born, 13 in all, stretching along the eastern seaboard from New Hampshire to Georgia. Each is different. Some, like Massachusetts, are founded by Puritans fleeing religious persecution. Others, like South Carolina, are born for profit and plantations. But all are tied to London by trade, taxes, and tradition. And yet, across the ocean, something begins to change. In the towns and fields of the colonies, a new identity begins to form. Colonists are still British, but also something else. They build their own governments, elect local assemblies, and publish their own newspapers. They clear forests, build towns, and speak of opportunity. There is freedom here, imperfect, uneven, but real. For white landowners at least, there's a growing sense that they can shape their own destiny, that they are no longer mere subjects of a distant king. This is not yet revolution, but it is the seed. But no story of America can be told without its shadows. Slavery spreads through the South, where vast plantations grow tobacco and cotton. Enslaved Africans are shipped by the tens of thousands to work under brutal conditions. Their labor builds much of the wealth that fuels colonial prosperity, yet they remain invisible in the founding documents. Meanwhile, native nations are pushed westward, their lands taken, their treaties broken. The American dream, even in its earliest form, comes at a high cost. Still, to many colonists, this land feels like a land of limitless promise. In 1754, a young officer named George Washington leads troops into the Ohio Valley. He fires the first shot in what becomes the 7 Years' War, a global conflict between Britain and France. In North America, it is known as the French and Indian War. The British win. France loses its foothold in Canada. The colonies feel a surge of pride. They fought alongside British troops. They shed blood for the empire. But victory has a price. The British crown, deep in debt, begins to tighten control over the colonies. And what once felt like partnership begins to feel like domination. London imposes new taxes. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act. The colonists protest, insisting, no taxation without representation. They are not against paying taxes. They are against being voiceless. Protest turned to riots. In Boston, British soldiers fire into a crowd, the Boston Massacre. In 1773, rebels, disguised as Mohawk natives, dump an entire shipment of British tea into the harbor, the Boston Tea Party. London responds with harsh punishment. The colonists respond with unity. Delegates from across the colonies meet in Philadelphia. They call themselves the Continental Congress. They don't yet speak of independence, but the idea is coming. It waits like thunder on the horizon. As the 1760s turn to the 1770s, a distinct American identity begins to take shape. Pamphlets like Thomas Paine circulate wildly, common sense, circulate wildly, calling for a break from monarchy, for a new kind of government built by the people for the people. Colonists are no longer just British subjects with grievances. They are becoming revolutionaries, ready to risk everything for self-rule. And in the hearts of farmers, blacksmiths, lawyers, and preachers, a quiet but unshakable truth is taking root, that a new nation may be born, not from nobility or conquest, but from an idea. Let me take you back again. It's the mid-1760s. The streets of Boston are restless. Lanterns flicker in the windows of taverns where arguments rage louder than the firelight. Across the colonies, whispers rise, whispers of injustice, of tyranny, of rebellion. The British crown has won the French and Indian War, but victory is expensive. King George III believes the colonies must help pay for it. The British Parliament passes a series of taxes, each one striking deeper than the last. And so, in 1765, it begins with the Stamp Act. A simple tax on paper? Hardly. To the colonists, it feels like a leash. The Stamp Act requires colonists to buy a special stamp for every legal document, newspaper, and even playing cards. But more than the cost, it's the principle that infuriates them. The colonies have no representatives in Parliament, so how can Parliament tax them? The cry spreads like wildfire. No taxation without representation. In New York, merchants boycott British goods. In Virginia, Patrick Henry thunders in the House of Burgesses. In Boston, a secret group forms, the Sons of Liberty. They are silversmiths, printers, shopkeepers, ordinary men who begin extraordinary resistance. Protests escalate. Tax collectors are harassed, their homes vandalized. In some cases, they're tarred and feathered in public, a brutal warning. The people are done being passive. In London, Parliament backs down. The Stamp Act is repealed. But the victory is short-lived. Parliament responds with new laws, the Townshend Acts. Taxes on glass, paper, and tea. Again, the colonies resist. Again, they are ignored. In 1770, British troops, redcoats, are stationed in Boston to enforce order. The tension becomes unbearable. Then, on a cold March night, it snaps. A crowd of colonists surrounds British soldiers outside the customs house. Snowballs fly, then rocks. The soldiers panic. Shots ring out. 5 colonists fall. The blood in the snow becomes legend. The Boston Massacre. A silversmith named Paul Revere etches an image of the event and prints it across the colonies. It shows the redcoats firing into a peaceful crowd. The truth is more complex. But by then, it doesn't matter. The story is set. The seed of revolution grows stronger. 3 years pass. In 1773, the British passed the Tea Act, giving the East India Company a monopoly and undercutting colonial merchants. The colonists see it not as relief, but as insult. And so, on the night of December 16th, 1773, Boston strikes back. Dozens of men, dressed as Mohawk warriors, board British ships under cover of darkness. They tear open crates and dump over 90,000 pounds of tea into the harbor. The salt water turns brown. The harbor smells of defiance. Britain is furious. Parliament passes the coercive acts. The colonists call them the intolerable acts. Boston Harbor is closed. Massachusetts loses its self-government. British soldiers are given more power. It's a chokehold, and yet it binds the colonies together like never before. In 1774, the First Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. Delegates from 12 colonies gather, planters from Virginia, merchants from New York, scholars from Massachusetts. They debate, they argue, but they agree on one thing. The time for submission is over.
Spring 1775. British troops receive orders to seize colonial weapons stored in Concord, Massachusetts, and to arrest leaders like Samuel Adams and John Hancock hiding in Lexington. But the Patriots are watching. On the night of April 18th, 2 writers set out. One of them becomes a legend, Paul Revere. Galloping through the countryside, he cries, "The British are coming." Though in truth, he likely whispered it, knowing loyalist ears might be nearby. By dawn, the militia Minutemen are ready. In Lexington, the Redcoats face about 70 colonists. A tense silence, then a shot rings out. No one knows who fired first. The British unleash a volley. 8 Americans lie dead. The Redcoats march onto Concord, but the stores are gone hidden. As they retreat, they are harried by farmers, shopkeepers, and blacksmiths firing from behind trees and stone walls. This is no longer a protest. This is war. Back in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress convenes. Among them is a tall Virginian with a commanding presence, George Washington. He is named Commander-in-Chief of the new Continental Army. It's a bold move. They are not just defending themselves, they are organizing for a long fight. And they still haven't declared independence. Not yet. As 1775 progresses, blood is spilled in major battles like Bunker Hill. Though the British technically win, they suffer heavy losses. The colonists prove they are not an easy enemy. In the north, the Americans try to invade Canada, unsuccessfully. In the south, loyalties are divided and tensions rise. The colonies are beginning to fracture along political, social, and even racial lines. The world watches. Britain, the mightiest empire on earth, now faces rebellion in its own colonies. But what the colonists fight for is still being defined. Then, in early 1776, a pamphlet appears. It is called Common Sense, written by an Englishman named Thomas Paine. In fiery, plain language, it argues for full independence, not compromise, not reconciliation, but a clean break. He writes, "These are the times that try men's souls." He challenges monarchy. He calls the king a tyrant, and he lights the minds of thousands on fire. The colonies begin to think the unthinkable. By the summer of 1776, sentiment has shifted. Debate burns hot in the halls of Congress. And then, on July 2nd, they vote. 2 days later, the formal words are signed. The Declaration of Independence, penned by Thomas Jefferson, edited by Franklin and Adams, adopted by 13 colonies. It declares that all men are created equal, that governments exist to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That when a government becomes destructive of these ends, the people have a right to alter or abolish it. They sign their names knowing it may cost them their lives. John Hancock signs first and largest. With ink on parchment, a new nation is born. Not of bloodline, not of conquest, but of ideals. The United States of America. But the war is far from over. In June 1775, before independence was even declared, American forces had surrounded Boston, hemming in British troops led by General Thomas Gage. The year-long siege had grown into a stalemate. Cold winters, supply shortages, and disease made the city a prison. But on March 4th, 1776, General George Washington made a bold move. Under heavy fog and by moonlight, colonists hauled cannon and armaments up to Dorchester Heights, overlooking Boston Harbor and the city. At dawn, the cannons were in place. Washington issued a demand for surrender. The British general faced a choice: fight or retreat. He retreated, evacuated his troops and loyalists by ship on March 17th, a day that would be celebrated as Evacuation Day in Massachusetts. American victory. The first true test of a military commander had been passed, and the Revolution gained its first real triumph. Now free to leave Boston, Washington moved his army south to protect New York City, a vital port, and confront British General William Howe. The summer of 1776 brought disaster. Howe landed with 32,000 British and Hessian troops. The Continental Army was outnumbered, undertrained, and undersupplied. August 27, 1776. The Battle of Long Island, Brooklyn Heights ends in a stunning British victory. Washington's men are nearly encircled, but under cover of darkness and dense fog, Washington performs a miracle. He orders a clandestine nighttime retreat across the East River. In one of the greatest escapes in military history, over 9,000 men slip away, leaving behind cannons, campfires, and the awe of friend and foe alike at his boldness. But New York remains in British hands. Washington retreats north across New Jersey toward Pennsylvania and dangerously close to defeat. Morale hits rock bottom. Desertion and hunger stalk the Continental Army as cold winds blow through the encampment near Trenton. Washington knows boldness is the answer. On Christmas night, crossing the frozen Delaware River, about 2,400 men march through sleet and ice toward Trenton, where Hessian forces are quartered. At dawn, with muskets and bayonets ablaze, they storm the town. In a brilliant 90-minute assault, they capture almost 1,000 Hessians. The news sweeps north. Washington repeats a similar victory at Princeton in early January 1777, forcing British troops to withdraw to New York. These victories don't end the war, but they save the Revolution. They revive the spirit of the army and the faith of the colonists. By summer 1777, British strategy shifts. General John Burgoyne lands near Lake Champlain, hoping to split the colonies by advancing south through New York. He expects support from Sir William Howe, but coordination fails. Burgoyne pushes toward Saratoga, where General Horatio Gates commands American forces. In two battles, Freeman's Farm, September 19th, and Bemis Heights, October 7th, Burgoyne's army breaks. Lacking reinforcements, he surrenders on October 17, 1777. It is the bloodiest surrender of a British army in history. Over 5,000 troops march off as prisoners. It's a turning point. Now the Americans have proof. They can win. And across the Atlantic, France notices. Under King Louis XVI, France begins to send arms, money, soldiers, and ships. First secretly, then openly. Other nations, Spain, the Dutch Republic, will soon follow. The American Revolution becomes a global war. The year 1777 ends. British occupy Philadelphia. The Continental Congress flees. Washington's army falls back. They make camp at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Over 2,500 soldiers die from cold and disease. Commissary wagons arrive slowly, if at all. Food is meager, coats and shoes are scarce. But in that adversity, the army is reborn. Into camp arrives Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a stern Prussian officer who drills the troops, instilling discipline and cohesion. With French artillery officers and Spanish engineers teaching, the Continental Army emerges stronger in spirit and capability. From Valley Forge rises a professional army, one capable of standing toe-to-toe with British regulars. By 1778 to 1780, the focus shifts south. British forces under Sir Henry Clinton sail to Savannah and Charleston, hoping to rally loyalists and divide the colonies. They seize Charleston in May 1780. General Benjamin Lincoln surrenders, a crushing blow. But soon a shadow war begins. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, leads guerrilla actions in South Carolina. Nathaniel Greene takes command of Continental forces in the South, conducting a brilliant campaign of strategy and evasion, deny, delay, harass. Meanwhile, on the seas, American privateers, merchant captains with letters of marque harass British shipping, capturing supply ships and pulling British convoys into expensive hunts. There are few moments more cinematic than 1781, when politics, diplomacy, and war converge. General Cornwallis positions his troops in Yorktown, Virginia, using the Chesapeake Bay to receive supplies and reinforcements. But Admiral François de Grasse sails a French fleet into the bay, blocking seaborne escape. Besieged by 18,000 Franco-American troops under Washington and French General Rochambeau, Cornwallis is trapped. After weeks of bombardment and siege operations, October 19, 1781, Cornwallis signs the formal Articles of Capitulation. It is the final major battle of the Revolution and a resounding victory for America. Fighting continues in small pockets into 1782, but Britain knows it cannot win. Negotiations begin, and in September 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed. Britain recognizes the United States of America as a sovereign nation. Its boundaries stretch from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River, from Canada to Florida. Fishing rights and debt repayment are addressed. Spain regains Florida. The 13 colonies are now 13 independent states united by shared experience and fragile federal bonds. War forged more than a nation. It forged identities and built legends. George Washington, once a colonel, emerges as the unifier, the symbol of American ideals. He returns to private life, an act as revolutionary as his military command. Benedict Arnold turns traitor, offering West Point to the British. His name becomes a synonym for treason. Marquis de Lafayette, the young French noble, risks all for a cause he believes in. Deborah Sampson, disguised as a man, fights at major battles. Crispus Attucks, an African American, becomes the first martyr at the Boston Massacre. Their stories tell of bravery, betrayal, sacrifice, and flawed humanity. When 1783 ends, the war is over, but the experiment is just beginning. The United States has won independence, but it has not yet found unity. The 13 states have different currencies, debts, and agendas. They need governance beyond Congress under the Articles of Confederation. They need diplomacy, trade, and economic stability. They need to define government itself. But for 2,000 miles, from New England's cold hills to Georgia's warm forests, people recognize they are now Americans. They fought together. They died together. They hoped together. And in that shared experience lies the promise and burden of a nation yet to be built. Let your mind echo with the spirit of victory, but also hear the strain that followed. The drums of independence have fallen silent. In their place stands a land whose freedom is secured, yet whose unity wavers on the edge of fragmentation. It is 1783. The war is done. The Treaty of Paris has been signed. The British troops have sailed away. The 13 states are free, their flag raised against the horizon. But what comes next? What holds them together? Freedom, like fire, can warm or scorch. The new nation must forge a government capable of harnessing liberty without destroying it. But first, it must face growing pains that threaten to undo everything its people won. Almost immediately after Yorktown, there is triumph, but also disappointment. The Continental Army, led by George Washington, remains assembled in the fields at Newburgh, New York, waiting for pay, land grants, and recognition. Congress has no treasury. Some officers talk of mutiny. Rumors spread of a possible military takeover. Washington addresses his officers with quiet dignity. He reminds them of their oath, their honor, and in a moment that becomes one of his greatest legacies, he shares his personal desire to return to his home at Mount Vernon. A decision that preserves civilian supremacy and buys enough time for Congress to meet the soldiers' demands. His restraint averts crisis, but it does not solve the deeper problem. The new nation has no strong government. Beginning in 1777, the Continental Congress had drafted the Articles of Confederation, a treaty between sovereign states affirming their alliance against Britain. It is ratified in 1781 in the midst of war. But the Articles create a weak central government. There is no executive branch, no president. There is a unicameral Congress, no Senate. Congress cannot tax. It can request money from states. Laws are passed only with a supermajority, but enforcement is left to the states. For wartime coordination, it sufficed. But in peacetime, it shows its cracks. States enter into their own trade agreements with foreign nations. Borders between states remain ill-defined, causing disputes. The Confederation government cannot regulate commerce, repel foreign threats, or fund its debts. Domestic unrest bubbles up. Shays' Rebellion, hit by high taxes and inflation, tips Massachusetts into disorder. America needs structure and fast. Educators, lawyers, planters, merchants begin to talk in whispers. Loud whispers for reform. Alexander Hamilton, once an aide to Washington, now writes passionately, "The nation needs a strong central government to unify its people." James Madison, the brilliant mind from Virginia, keeper of notes at the 1786 Constitutional Convention in Annapolis, calls for a meeting of all states in Philadelphia. They must create something stronger. The task is enormous. The soul of the nation feels at stake. In May 1787, delegates convene in Philadelphia under the pretense of amending the Articles. But the truth is clear. They intend to rewrite the government. 39 men sit in the darkened chamber. Wealthy planters, lawyers, merchants. There is tension. There is idealism. There is fear. The plan quickly emerges. Not reform, but rebirth. The Virginia Plan, championed by Madison, calls for a strong national government with a bicameral legislature, representation based on population, a powerful executive, and a federal judiciary. Smaller states push back. They demand equal representation, raise the New Jersey Plan, a unicameral legislature where each state, no matter size, has one vote. What follows is contest, compromise, and sweat. On July 16th, the famous Great Compromise is struck, also known as the Connecticut Compromise. A bicameral Congress is created. House of Representatives, representation by population. Senate, 2 senators per state. Slavery remains contentious. Southern states want slaves counted for representation. Northern states say no. A 3/5 compromise is agreed. Each slave counts as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation. The blow is severe, but the nation continues. To keep power from concentrating, the framers establish a system of separation of powers. Legislative Congress makes laws. Executive President enforces laws. Judiciary Supreme Court interprets laws. Each branch has checks and balances. The President can veto, Congress can override. The Senate approves appointments. The court can declare laws unconstitutional. The President is commander-in-chief, but only Congress can declare war and fund the military. It is all crafted to ensure no single man or faction can dominate. Selecting an executive is one of the most controversial aspects. Some delegates fear monarchy. Others demand strength. Early proposals include a multi-person executive body or a single president elected by Congress. But eventually, a compromise is reached. A single president serving a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election. An electoral college is created. Citizens vote for electors who vote for the president. This system balances the influence of large and small states and addresses fears of mob rule. The president will symbolize unity and guard against tyranny. By late August 1787, the Constitution is completed. The delegates sign it, but not all are happy. Patrick Henry refuses to sign, John Dickinson abstains, and others worry it lacks a protection for individual rights. Ratification now passes to the states. Public debate explodes. Federalists defend the Constitution. Hamilton, Madison, and Jay write their famous Federalist Papers. Anti-Federalists, Jefferson, Henry, Lee warn the document gives too much central power and lacks a Bill of Rights. State ratifying conventions, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, are fraught with passion, tears, persuasion speeches. The nation trembles. By June 1788, 9 states ratify. The Constitution becomes effective. But Federalists promise to add amendments to secure rights. The largest states remain undecided. Virginia ratifies only after a coalition forms. Madison promises a Bill of Rights. New York follows. And North Carolina and Rhode Island ratify in July 1789 and May 1790 after the bill is sent to Congress. Thus, the Constitution is born. And the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, are drafted to protect free speech, religion, assembly, press, trial by jury, and other fundamental rights. They are sent to the states and become effective by December 1791. April 30th, 1789, George Washington is sworn in as the first president. He chooses peak integrity. No king, he bows his head. He creates departments, state, treasury, war, and appoints. Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. Henry Knox as Secretary of War. Edmund Randolph as Attorney General. These men, plus Washington, form his cabinet, the first advisory body to the president. In his inaugural speech, he warns against factions, foreign entanglements, and sectionalism. He intends to hold the nation together. The new government must prove stability through action. Hamilton proposes assumption of state debts. The federal government takes on the accumulated Revolutionary War debts from states, paying them as national honor. Funding at par, federal government will buy outstanding bonds at face value, boosting credit. National Bank, a federal bank, the Bank of the United States, to manage finances, issue currency, and collect taxes. Excise tax and tariffs raise revenue through tariffs, especially on imports, and a small whiskey tax to fund interest payments. Madison and Jefferson oppose, arguing it favors northern states and wealthy speculators. But compromise emerges. Hamilton's plan is accepted in exchange for a permanent capital on the Potomac River, Washington, D.C. An appealing concession for southern states. It is bold. It works. By 1791, the new government is running. The Supreme Court issues its first decision, Chisholm versus Georgia. Tax revenue begins flowing. Interest on debt is paid. The bank opens in Philadelphia. Federal courts handle cases, maritime law, treason, maritime disputes. The Constitution is more than theory, it is practice. After 2 terms, Washington retires in 1797. His farewell address is a masterclass in statesmanship. Avoid permanent alliances. Resist political factions. Preserve the unity of the Union. He returns to Mount Vernon, leaving a legacy of rule by choice, not force. His precedent 2-term limit is adhered to until the 20th century, long after his death. The new republic is fragile but alive. It has a flexible constitution amendable by law, a functional executive, legislative, and judicial branch, a stable economy backed by credit, a rotating presidency, a citizenry invested in freedom yet aware of its responsibility. Yet tensions remain. The North-South division simmers. Federalists and Democratic, Republicans, Jeffersonians begin dividing on the meaning of the Constitution, states' rights versus strong central power. Foreign policy is being tested as France and Britain embroil America in their Napoleonic Wars. The experiment continues. The founding years are a testament to America's promise and peril. A nation that began in rebellion must now prove itself against the tyranny it escaped. Tyranny of foreign powers, of domestic upheaval, of inequity, and entrenched privilege. By forging a constitution, spinning out a government, paying its debts, and holding power accountable, America builds a foundation. But the tree it plants remains fragile. Only time and commitment will tell if it will flourish or wither. It's April 30th, 1789, in New York City, America's first capital under the new Constitution. A cold spring wind blows across Federal Hall. Streets are filled with citizens' curiosity in their eyes. They come not to see a king, but a man who symbolizes something more, the promise of a republic. Washington arrives in a carriage drawn by 6 white horses. His face is solemn. His uniform, a blue-brown coat with buff facings, reveals a leader who earned his reputation in war, not show. He ascends the steps, his hand raised on a Bible placed on a mahogany stand. All around, spectators hold their breath. He takes the first presidential oath in American history. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. He speaks 2 sentences as his inaugural address, short, humble, firm. He is not embracing power, he is accepting responsibility. Washington understands his place. He seeks neither crown nor unchallengeable authority. He sets precedents. He sits for just 2 terms, declining a third in 1796. He travels to state dinners in a carriage pulled by citizens, not servants. He seeks respectful distance between his office and people's passions. From day one, he shapes not just policy, but tone, balance, restraint, unity. Washington knows he cannot lead isolation. He needs counsel, men he trusts, but who also check him. He creates what becomes the presidential cabinet. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, voice of Republican virtue and agrarian ideals. Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, the architect of America's economy. Henry Knox, Secretary of War, the nation builder in uniform. Edmund Randolph, Attorney General, the law's guardian. These men do not always agree. They argue fiercely. Jefferson loves the small farmer and fears concentrated power. Hamilton believes America must be a financial powerhouse, centralized in a strong federal government. In these debates, foundational questions arise. Should the federal government assume state war debts? Who should pay taxes, the rich or all citizens? Will there be a national bank or local control of currency? Washington sits at the center. He listens, he balances, he resolves. Hamilton needs a functioning economy. Under the Articles of Confederation, states had varying currencies, and war debts were piling up. His vision, federal assumption of state debts. The national government should take on the war debts of states. This restores confidence in the economy and binds states to federal power. Funding at par. Hamilton proposes that the federal government honor diplomatic bonds, including those sold at steep discounts, to encourage investment in America's future. The National Bank. Modeled after the Bank of England, it will be chartered for 20 years, hold government deposits, issue a stable currency, and offer credit. Congress opposes. Hamilton prevails with Washington's decision. Excise taxes and tariffs. To pay interest on debt, Hamilton proposes a whiskey tax and tariffs on imports, a test of federal authority. The result, a functioning economy, deepening American credit. But the price, the birth of political factions. Hamilton's plans split opinion. Disagreements morph into ideologies. Those who rally around Hamilton become the Federalists, centralization, commerce, intellectual aristocracy. Those who stand with Jefferson become the Republicans, later Democratic Republicans, state rights, agrarian democracy, personal liberty. They argue openly in newspapers, letters, in Congress, and coffee houses. They even form clandestine societies. Washington observes with concern. He warns of factionalism in his farewell address. Both factions shape America's political future. In 1794, Congress enforces a tax on whiskey, Hamilton's revenue plan. Farmers in western Pennsylvania explode in protest. They see it as an assault on their livelihoods. They tar and feather tax collectors. They threaten congressmen. They fly a liberty and no excise banner. Washington smells crisis. He issues a proclamation demanding a cease. When ignored, he does something that would test the new government. He calls up the militia, 13,000 strong, from several states. For the first time in American history, the standing government uses force to enforce federal law within the United States. The militia marches. The rebellion collapses without major confrontation. The message is clear. Federal laws apply everywhere. Europe is at war. Britain fights France. Seas rumble with conflict. American ships are caught in the crossfire. France, America's ally in 1778, demands support. Britain, the old imperial foe, looms powerful. Spain lingers to the south. In 1793, the U.S. issues the Proclamation of Neutrality. Washington asserts that America will avoid entangling alliances, a noble stance that protects the fragile nation. Jefferson resigns, unable to agree. Washington's decision remains a pillar of American isolationism until the 20th century. To avoid war with Britain, Washington sends Chief Justice John Jay to negotiate. In 1794, the Jay Treaty is signed. Britain agrees to evacuate Northwest Forts, Ohio Valley. American ships gain limited trade rights in the British Empire. Terms fall short of Republican hopes, but enough to avoid war. Public opinion rages. Jefferson's allies denounce it, but Washington stands firm. The treaty squeaks through Senate approval. Tensions ease. England honors its side. Washington understands that stability extends beyond borders. In 1795, he sends Thomas Pinckney to Spain. The result, Pinckney's treaty grants Americans rights to the Mississippi River, western navigation, and trade through New Orleans. It reassures settlers. It confirms that American diplomacy can achieve peace without combat. Washington has averted war and reinforced national stability. As the 1790s close, Washington grows weary. Political rancor deepens. Disagreements about France, tariffs, and federal power threaten national unity. In December 1796, he publishes his farewell address, reminds Americans to cherish unity, to avoid permanent foreign alliances, to steer clear of political parties and sectionalism. He leaves office in March 1797. He returns to Mount Vernon, the man who had led a revolution, shaped a constitution, and governed with restraint. When he dies in December 1799, a national outpouring of grief follows. His funeral train stops in every major city. House bells toll. Public mourning ensues. Washington's presidency defines the republic's character. He refused the monarchy. He created precedents for peaceful transition. He defended federal authority. He guided foreign policy with restraint. He warned against partisan division. His legacy shapes government and politics for generations. The presidency, once experimental, now stands secure. The republic has survived its birth. Now it begins to grow. But with every acre gained, new tensions rise. Opportunity beckons in the West. But so do conflict, contradiction, and ambition. The ink has barely dried on the Constitution, but Americans are already looking westward. The Appalachian Mountains no longer feel like the edge of the world. To settlers, farmers, and land speculators, they are simply a gateway to freedom, wealth, and land. By the late 1790s, more than 100,000 Americans have crossed the Appalachians into Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Ohio Valley. New towns emerge from forests. Log cabins dot the frontier. And with each settlement, the dream of manifest destiny takes early root even before the term exists. But expansion brings consequences. It challenges diplomacy, intensifies conflict with native nations, and raises the question, will this new land carry freedom or just extend old chains? In 1801, Thomas Jefferson becomes the third president of the United States. He is a philosopher, inventor, and idealist, but above all, a believer in the yeoman farmer. He imagines America as a vast landscape of independent farmers, educated, self-reliant, and free. Cities, he fears, breed corruption. Industry, he warns, invites dependence. So Jefferson seeks land, vast, fertile western land, to secure the future of his agrarian vision. That vision soon becomes a reality with one of the boldest land deals in world history. In 1803, Jefferson sends diplomats to France. Their mission, to buy New Orleans and secure trade on the Mississippi River. But Napoleon Bonaparte, distracted by war in Europe and rebellion in Haiti, offers something far bigger, all of Louisiana. The price? $15 million. Overnight, the United States doubles in size. From the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. More than 800,000 square miles. A deal that gives America room to grow and sets the stage for future conflict. Jefferson, though unsure if the Constitution allows such a purchase, sets aside his doubts. The opportunity is too great. The Louisiana Purchase becomes a defining moment in American expansion and Jefferson's legacy. What lies beyond the Mississippi? To find out, Jefferson commissions Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead an expedition west. Their orders: map the territory, establish trade, find a route to the Pacific, and study the land, animals, and people. In May 1804, the Corps of Discovery sets out. They travel by boat, horseback, and foot. They encounter over 50 Native American tribes. They cross the Rockies and reach the Pacific Ocean in late 1805. Along the way, they are aided by a young Shoshone woman, Sacagawea, who becomes their guide, translator, and symbol of peace. The expedition lasts over 2 years. It brings back maps, scientific notes, and a new vision of what America might one day become, but for Native peoples, this expansion is not a dream, it is a threat. Tribes like the Shawnee, Creek, Cherokee, and Comanche see their lands claimed by treaties they did not sign, settlers they did not invite, and governments they do not recognize. One of the fiercest resistors is a Shawnee leader named Tecumseh. He calls for Native unity. He travels from the Great Lakes to the Gulf, urging tribes to resist encroachment. Alongside his brother, known as the Prophet, he founds a pan-Indian movement. In 1811, U.S. forces under William Henry Harrison attacked the Confederation's base at Tippecanoe. Tecumseh's dream of a unified native resistance is dealt a heavy blow. But the conflicts continue for generations. Expansion also draws America into a new war, this time with Britain. Tensions simmer. British ships impress American sailors into service. British agents arm native resistance in the Northwest Territory. America wants to assert itself on the world stage. In 1812, President James Madison asks Congress for a declaration of war. The War of 1812 begins. Washington, D.C. is burned in 1814. American forces win at Lake Erie, Thames, and New Orleans. Andrew Jackson emerges as a national hero after defending New Orleans in 1815. Though the Treaty of Ghent restores pre-war boundaries, the war has lasting consequences. It confirms American sovereignty. It weakens native alliances with Britain. It fuels nationalism and a new sense of destiny. As settlers pour into the new territories, a question emerges that will haunt America for decades. Will slavery expand westward? In 1820, Missouri applies for statehood as a slave state. The balance in the Senate, equal between slave and free states, is at stake. The compromise engineered by Henry Clay is this. Missouri enters as a slave state. Maine enters as a free state. Slavery is banned north of the 36 degrees 30 minutes parallel in the Louisiana Territory. The Missouri Compromise delays sectional conflict, but doesn't resolve it. The fault lines of civil war have formed. To the south, America eyes Florida, then a Spanish colony, loosely governed and filled with escaped slaves, Seminole warriors, and outlaws. In 1819, Secretary of State John Quincy Adams negotiates the Adams-Onis Treaty. Spain cedes Florida to the U.S. The U.S. renounces claims to Texas temporarily. This marks another victory for expansion and strengthens Southern ambitions. But it also deepens confrontations with native peoples, particularly the Seminoles, who will fight in 3 bloody wars to resist removal. In 1823, President James Monroe, with advice from John Quincy Adams, issues a bold statement. The American continents are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. This Monroe Doctrine declares the Western Hemisphere off-limits to European empires. Though America lacks the military to enforce it alone, Britain supports it, aligning their naval power with American ideals. The doctrine marks a turning point. The U.S. now defines itself not just as a republic, but as a guardian of the New World. By the 1820s, the United States is no longer a fragile experiment. Its territory stretches from the Atlantic to the Rocky Mountains. Its population has doubled. Its economy thrives on agriculture, trade, and industry. Its democracy, though limited, expands. But with growth comes contradiction. Slavery grows with the South. Native peoples are displaced and broken. Sectionalism deepens. Politics become more populist, more combative. The frontier is no longer just a place. It is a symbol of possibility, ambition, and sometimes injustice. Expansion shaped the early republic not just in land, but in identity. It fulfilled Jefferson's dream of space for the American ideal. But it also unleashed forces that would divide the nation. As settlers push toward the Pacific, America's destiny seems unstoppable. But so does its reckoning. Let me tell you a story, not of kings or nobles, but of a man born in a log cabin, raised by hardship, and lifted to the highest office in the land. His name was Andrew Jackson, and his era would redefine American politics, for better and for worse. The early 1800s were a time of change. The young republic had grown, its borders expanded, its industries multiplied, and its population surged. But so too did inequality, conflict, and debate about what it meant to be a true American. Jackson, with his rugged image and populist voice, would stride into this uncertainty like a storm. In the decades after the American Revolution, most political power remained in the hands of the wealthy elite, landowners, lawyers, and merchants. But that began to change with the rise of universal white male suffrage. By the 1820s, property requirements for voting were being eliminated in many states. Now, white men who were poor or working class could vote, and they wanted someone who spoke for them, not just the elite. Enter Andrew Jackson, war hero, frontiersman, self-made man. He'd risen from nothing. Orphaned at 14, scarred by a British officer's sword, he made his name as a lawyer, judge, and general. In the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812, he became a national hero. His image, tough, plain-spoken, incorruptible. A man of the people, Jackson ran for president in 1824, winning the popular vote but losing in the House of Representatives to John Quincy Adams thanks to what many called a corrupt bargain. Jackson's supporters never forgot. In 1828, Jackson ran again, this time building a grassroots political machine. He campaigned not just in capitals and salons, but in taverns, fairs, and town halls. Posters called him Old Hickory, tough as wood. He promised to protect the common man from the elites, to fight corruption, and to return power to the people. The campaign was vicious. Jackson's opponents called him a murderer and a brute. His wife, Rachel, was accused of bigamy. But Jackson won by a landslide, marking a new era, the dawn of Jacksonian democracy. Jackson saw himself as the direct voice of the people. He expanded presidential power in unprecedented ways. To his supporters, he was a champion of democracy. To his critics, he was dangerously authoritarian. He believed in the spoils system, rewarding political supporters with government jobs. Veto power. Jackson used the presidential veto more than all his predecessors combined. Rotation in office, a way to prevent elite entrenchment, but it also created cronyism. For Jackson, the will of the people wasn't just important, it was absolute. If Congress disagreed with him, he claimed he, elected by the people, was their true voice. One of Jackson's fiercest battles was against the Second Bank of the United States, a powerful, private institution that regulated the national economy. Jackson believed the bank favored the rich, was corrupt and undemocratic, threatened liberty. When Congress reauthorized the bank's charter, Jackson vetoed it. In his famous message, he declared that government should not make the rich richer and the potent more powerful. He then withdrew federal funds and placed them in state pet banks, destabilizing the financial system. His actions led to inflation, speculation, and eventually a major economic panic. But for Jackson, the issue was philosophical. No unelected institution should control the nation's wealth. Jackson also faced rebellion, not from abroad, but from within. In 1832, South Carolina, led by John C. Calhoun, declared that it could nullify federal laws, specifically high tariffs that hurt Southern economies. They even threatened secession. Jackson, though a Southerner himself, stood firm. He believed in union above all. Disunion by armed force, he said, is treason. Congress passed a force bill allowing Jackson to use the military to enforce the law. But a compromise brokered by Henry Clay defused the crisis. Still, the nullification crisis was a warning. The divide between North and South was growing deeper. The idea that a state could reject federal authority would resurface again in blood. Perhaps the darkest legacy of Jackson's presidency was his Indian removal policy. Jackson saw Native American tribes in the Southeast, like the Cherokee, Creek, and Chickasaw, as obstacles to progress. He believed their land should be open for white settlement. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, granting Jackson the authority to negotiate land exchange treaties and forcibly remove tribes to lands west of the Mississippi. Many tribes resisted. The Cherokee Nation took their case to the Supreme Court and won. Chief Justice John Marshall ruled in favor of Cherokee sovereignty. But Jackson allegedly replied, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." Jackson ignored the court. Under his administration, thousands of Native Americans were forced to march west on what became known as the Trail of Tears. Over 4,000 Cherokee died from disease, starvation, and exposure. Andrew Jackson left office in 1837, succeeded by his ally Martin Van Buren. But Jackson's influence continued to shape American politics for decades. He created the foundation of the modern Democratic Party. He redefined the presidency as a powerful, independent branch directly connected to the people. He expanded voting and political participation, at least for white men. But his legacy is also marked by authoritarian tendencies, economic disruption, deep injustices toward native peoples. To some, Jackson was a people's champion. To others, a tyrant in democratic clothing. It was a national tragedy and a stain on America's democratic promise. The age of Jackson was messy, loud, and filled with contradictions, just like democracy itself. It gave voice to the ordinary citizen but silenced others. It expanded freedom for some while denying it to many. America was no longer a republic ruled by elites. It was now a nation defined by popular will and by the fierce, flawed men who claimed to speak for it. But as the country grew louder, so did its inner tensions. As America expanded, so too did a contradiction at the heart of its ideals, the coexistence of liberty and slavery. While the nation proudly called itself a land of freedom, millions of black men, women, and children remained in chains, bought, sold, and forced to labor under brutal conditions. The Founding Fathers had left slavery largely unresolved. Some hoped it would fade with time. Instead, it grew. By the early 1800s, slavery was deeply embedded in Southern society and economy, especially with the rise of the cotton gin, which made cotton immensely profitable. The South built its wealth on slavery. The North, though largely free, still benefited through banks, shipping, and textile mills. But the moral battle was beginning. Abolition, the call to end slavery, was not new. But in the early 19th century, it became a growing force. Voices rose, louder and more defiant. Frederick Douglass, once enslaved, escaped and became one of the most powerful orators of his time. His speeches exposed slavery's cruelty with sharp, fearless clarity. Harriet Tubman, another escapee, returned again and again to the South to rescue others via the Underground Railroad, risking her life for freedom. William Lloyd Garrison, a white journalist, published The Liberator, demanding immediate emancipation, not gradual change. These abolitionists were seen by many as dangerous radicals, but they planted the seeds of a national reckoning. As abolition grew, so did Southern resistance. Slaveholders defended slavery as a positive good. They cited the Bible, history, and economics. They cracked down on dissent. They passed gag rules in Congress to silence anti-slavery petitions. But even enslaved people resisted in subtle and bold ways. From breaking tools to open rebellion. In 1831, Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher in Virginia, led a violent uprising. Dozens of white families were killed. The rebellion was crushed, but it terrified the South. Slave laws became harsher. Fear deepened. So did the divide. By the 1840s and 1850s, America stood at a crossroads. New territories raised the question, would slavery expand westward? The Missouri Compromise and Compromise of 1850 tried to maintain balance. But tension kept rising section by section, state by state. Slavery was no longer just a Southern issue. It was a national crisis, one built into the foundation of the Republic, and one that would soon tear it apart. Let me tell you a story, not just of politics and laws, but of blood spilled on American soil. A land divided not by rivers or mountains, but by a single haunting question. Would new states permit slavery or reject it? It was the 1850s. America was growing fast, stretching westward with dreams of new towns, railroads, and opportunities. But every new territory raised a dangerous question. Free or slave? The balance between North and South, freedom and bondage, teetered with each new mile. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. It shattered the fragile peace. The law, crafted by Senator Stephen Douglas, let settlers in each new territory decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. It sounded democratic, but in practice, it turned Kansas into a war zone. Almost overnight, Kansas became the front line in America's brewing Civil War. A flood of settlers poured in. Abolitionists from the North rushed to claim land and votes. Pro-slavery settlers from Missouri, called border ruffians, crossed the river armed and angry. Town after town became battlegrounds. Ballot boxes were stuffed. Governments were formed, then overturned. Soon, arguments gave way to gunfire. In 1856, Lawrence, Kansas, a free state town, was raided by pro-slavery forces. They burned buildings and destroyed printing presses. Just days later, John Brown, a fiery abolitionist, struck back. He and his sons attacked a pro-slavery settlement at Pottawatomie Creek, killing 5 men with swords in the dark of night. The territory descended into chaos. Over 200 people died in what became known as Bleeding Kansas. It wasn't just a political debate anymore. It was war in miniature, a grim preview of what was coming for the whole nation. Even in the halls of power, blood was spilled. In May 1856, abolitionist Senator Charles Sumner gave a fiery speech condemning slavery and attacking Southern senators. Days later, Congressman Preston Brooks, a relative of one of the men Sumner insulted, entered the Senate chamber. With a heavy cane, Brooks brutally beat Sumner on the Senate floor, nearly killing him. The South praised Brooks as a hero. The North was horrified. The message was clear, words were no longer enough. The time for talking was ending. The violence in Kansas and Congress shook the nation. President Franklin Pierce failed to bring peace. Political parties fractured. The old Whig Party collapsed, and a new one rose from the ashes, the Republican Party, founded on opposing the expansion of slavery. And in 1858, a tall, thoughtful lawyer from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln began to speak out, warning that Bleeding Kansas wasn't just about settlers and sovereignty. It was about the soul of a nation. Would America continue to tolerate slavery or confront it? The time for compromise was coming to an end, and the road ahead was leading toward war. And so, as the fires of conflict ignite across Kansas and even within the halls of Congress, America stands on the edge of a storm. The cracks in the foundation have deepened. The battles are no longer just political. They are personal, violent, and inevitable. But the greatest test still lies ahead. In the next chapter, we'll journey into the darkest hour of the American experiment, the Civil War, a conflict that would decide the fate of the Union and the meaning of freedom itself. Speech Balloon, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what moments in American history fascinate you the most? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss the next chapter. Open book. Until then, history remains alive and its stories are far from over.